Lucas Mercer paid $500 for a dusty storage unit that nobody wanted. He thought he was buying junk, a few old chairs, maybe a broken refrigerator, something worth enough to cover this month's electricity bill. He did not think he would find a locked laptop, 3 boxes of documents bearing the name of a billion-dollar company, and a small USB drive labeled by hand in red ink. He did not think that ordinary Saturday morning would bring the most powerful man in the city knocking on his door. He did not think any of it, because men like Lucas Mercer never imagine that the one thing they cannot afford to walk away from will be sitting in a corrugated aluminum storage unit on a cracked asphalt lot at the edge of the industrial district. And yet, here it was. Do not look away. This story starts with $500 and ends with everything. Lucas Mercer was 34 years old, and he knew how to fix things. That had always been true from the time he was a teenager rewiring his mother's kitchen outlets in a 2-bedroom house in Aurora, Colorado, to the years he spent as a certified building maintenance technician keeping the plumbing, electrical panels, and HVAC systems of Voss Capitol Tower running smoothly through Denver's brutal winters. He was not a man who complained. He showed up early, carried his tools in a green canvas bag worn soft at the handles, and solved problems before the people in the glass offices above him even knew the problems existed. He did not talk much at work, he observed. He had learned long ago that a maintenance technician who speaks without being spoken to in a corporate building is quickly categorized as a nuisance, and Lucas Mercer had no interest in being a nuisance. He had a daughter named Ella, 7 years old, who drew yellow-roofed houses in her sketchbook and asked him why the sky turned pink at sunset. He told her it was science, she told him it was magic, he did not argue. His wife Megan had died 3 years earlier in a car accident on Interstate 70, a Tuesday in November, a wet road, a delivery truck that drifted 1 lane too far. Ella had been 4 years old, Lucas had been 31 and had not slept properly for about 6 months after that, but he had kept showing up to work, kept packing Ella's lunch, kept paying the rent on their 2-bedroom apartment in Lakewood. He did not do these things because he was extraordinary. He did them because Ella needed him to, and because he understood that the most important work a person can do is often the work that no one sees or thanks them for. He had built a quiet life, not a comfortable life. Comfort requires a margin, and Lucas operated on no margin at all, but a functional one, a dignified one, the kind of life that stays together as long as nothing unexpected hits it too hard. The unexpected arrived in the form of Owen Drake, building operations manager, who called Lucas into the maintenance office on the 2nd floor of Voss Capitol Tower on a Wednesday afternoon in late September and told him his hours were being reduced, not eliminated, reduced, from 40 hours a week to 24. Operational restructuring was the phrase Owen used, delivered to a point slightly above Lucas's left shoulder, in the flat tone of someone reading from a prepared statement. No explanation beyond those 2 words, no severance, no discussion, no apology. Lucas stood in that office and nodded, because he understood there was nothing he could say that would reverse the decision. He walked back to his cart and went on with his work. But that evening, sitting at the kitchen table after Ella had gone to bed, he did the math on a napkin. Rent was $1,100 per month. Utilities, groceries, Ella's school lunch account, the small monthly payment on his truck. By the end of the month, he would be $340 short. He stared at the number on the napkin for a long time. He was not a man who panicked, but he was also not a man who deceived himself. $340 was $340. It was Samuel Reed who came up with the idea. Samuel was 36, a long-haul truck driver who had been Lucas's closest friend since they worked a summer job together at a loading dock 11 years ago. A friendship built less on common interests than on a shared instinct for when to talk and when to stay quiet. Samuel called on a Thursday night, his voice carrying the background noise of a truck stop somewhere off I-25, and told Lucas about the storage unit auction at Denver Metro Storage that Saturday morning. The way Samuel explained it, people abandoned storage units all the time. Stopped paying fees, moved away, let 3 months go by and lost everything inside to the auction block. Sometimes units were full of worthless junk. Sometimes they held electronics, tools, collectibles worth real money. "You've got good eyes," Samuel said, "and you can spot quality hardware from across a room. That counts for something at these things." Lucas sat at the kitchen table and looked at the coffee can on the counter. His emergency fund, the last real financial cushion he had, $500. He thought about Ella asleep in the next room. He called Samuel back and said he would go. Denver Metro Storage sat at the edge of the South Side Industrial District, a low concrete complex the color of old chalk surrounded by cracked asphalt and a chain-link fence whose gate rattled steadily in the October wind. Lucas and Samuel arrived at 6:45 in the morning, the air cold enough to see their breath, the sky a narrow pale strip above the roofline. There were already 20-some people gathered near the entrance, most of them regulars. Lucas could tell by the practiced stillness, the folded arms, the minimal nods exchanged between familiar faces. Several had pickup trucks parked nearby with cargo straps visible in the beds and hand trucks leaning against the rear bumpers. These were professionals in the specific way that Salvon Resale creates professionals. People who had made enough bad bets on abandoned storage units to know exactly what they were looking at and exactly how much it was worth, almost instantly. Lucas and Samuel stood at the edge of the group with a beat-up pickup truck and $500 in cash and no particular expertise. Which is to say they were exactly the kind of people the regulars regarded with the mild pity reserved for amateurs who had not yet been taught by experience. The auctioneer was a thin man named Gary in a yellow vest with a clipboard, and he moved through the first units quickly. Unit 89 went for $210, boxes of children's clothing, a broken dresser, a floor lamp with no shade. Unit 102 drew more interest, sporting equipment, a partial home gym setup, what looked like a commercial-grade rowing machine under a tarp. It sold for $650 to a compact man in a green jacket who moved immediately to bring his truck around. Samuel bid on a unit that turned out to hold mostly old office furniture and lost the lot to a woman with a flatbed trailer who had clearly been waiting for exactly that kind of find. Unit 108 generated a brief dry wave of laughter when the door rolled up to reveal 3 folding chairs and a bag of cat food. The crowd moved on. Then Gary stopped in front of Unit 114, lifted the padlock, and rolled the door up with a metallic clatter. The crowd went quiet in a way that was different from the usual anticipatory pause. A flatter, more indifferent silence. There was no furniture, no appliances, no exercise equipment, no sign of anything that could be quickly valued and resold at a weekend market. What filled the unit was tightly packed and carefully organized. 3 rows of brown cardboard boxes, each one sealed with packing tape and labeled in black marker with short alphanumeric codes that meant nothing without context. A folding table sat against the left wall, and in the far corner, partly hidden behind the last row of boxes, sat a small black hard-sided case with a combination lock built into its latch. A compact, serious-looking case of the kind used for sensitive equipment or documents, not the kind found at discount retailers. Gary listed the contents as business documents and miscellaneous items and opened the bidding at $200. The professionals looked calculated and moved on. Cardboard boxes full of paperwork had burned most of them before. 2 hands went up. Lucas was one of them. The other hand belonged to a heavyset man in a red jacket who had won 3 units already that morning and was bidding with the easy looseness of someone spending someone else's money. They moved up in $50 increments. At $250, Lucas was still in. At $300, still in. At $350, the man in the red jacket took a long final look at the interior, the brown boxes, the folding table, the black case in the corner, and then slowly lowered his hand and stepped back. Gary looked at Lucas. Lucas said 500, Gary called it. The unit was his. He signed the paperwork with a borrowed pen, received his receipt, and walked to the entrance of the unit. Samuel appeared beside him, looked in, and said, "You just paid $500 for a room full of someone's filing system." Lucas did not respond. He was looking at the black case in the far corner at the small handwritten label on its side, 114. JC, do not auction. Someone had meant to stop this unit from being sold. They had been exactly 72 hours too late. They loaded everything into Samuel's truck in 40 minutes and carried it up 3 flights of stairs to the spare room in Lucas's apartment, where tools and Ella's art supplies competed for shelf space with the boxes they were now stacking against the far wall. Samuel had a run to Pueblo at noon and left after helping carry the last box up. Lucas made a pot of coffee, stood in the doorway of the spare room and looked at what he had bought. Then he put on his work gloves, not for any good reason, just habit, and began opening boxes. The first box held contracts, long legal documents, 20 to 30 pages each, printed on heavy white paper and bound with binder clips. Each one dealt with real estate transactions, land purchases, development agreements, financing arrangements for large commercial properties spread across Denver, Colorado Springs, and Pueblo. The names of the parties ran across the top of each cover page in bold type, and one name appeared consistently across every single document in the box: Voss Capital Group. Lucas turned the pages slowly and without expression. He knew that name. He worked in a building that name owned. He had replaced light fixtures in hallways that name paid for, repaired elevators that carried people working for that name, kept the mechanical systems running that allowed an entire glass tower of commerce to function uninterrupted. He set the contracts down and opened the second box. The second box contained internal financial reports. Dense documents printed on paper bearing the Voss Capital Group letterhead, each page numbered, each section marked with headers. Lucas could parse but not fully interpret. The figures were large, columns of 8 and 9-digit numbers, arranged in tables that suggested major capital movements, project valuations, disbursement schedules. His wife Megan had been 18 months into her master's in business administration when she died, and for 2 years before that he had listened to her work through case studies at the kitchen table, had absorbed more than he realized about how company finances were supposed to look and how they sometimes looked instead. What he noticed first was the stamps, red ink, block letters, applied to the bottom corner of a significant number of pages. Do not copy. Do not distribute. That kind of stamp does not appear on routine financial documents. It appears on documents that someone in authority specifically decided should not exist outside of a controlled environment, and yet here they were, stacked in a brown cardboard box in his spare room, because someone had stored them in a unit they stopped paying for. The third box was different from the first two. On top lay a laptop, an old Dell with a scratched lid and a power cord wrapped around it with a rubber band. He opened it and pressed the power button. A login screen appeared immediately, password protected, no hint offered. Beneath the laptop was a thick manila envelope with a name written on it in black marker. JC, Personal Archive. He opened the envelope carefully, the way he opened anything that might matter. Inside were photographs, printed receipts, and scanned email records. Not originals, but paper printouts of digital correspondence, the kind a person makes when they want a physical backup of something they do not fully trust to exist only on a server. Several of the emails had names and addresses blacked out with a heavy marker, but the redaction had not been thorough. Words remained visible in the gaps. He held one page under the lamp and read what he could make out, one fragment at a time, with the patient focus of a man trained to find the source of a system fault by reading error codes on a panel. The black hard case yielded after 20 minutes of work, not through the combination lock, which he left alone, but through the hinge screws on the back, which he removed with a flathead screwdriver. Inside, packed in foam cutouts, sat a compact external hard drive and 2 USB drives, each one sealed in a small, clear plastic bag. The first USB was labeled with a number, the second was labeled with a date from 14 months prior. Lucas lined them up on the table beside the laptop and the manila envelope and the 2 open boxes and sat down in the chair he had pulled in from the kitchen. He looked at everything for a long time. He did not open the USB drives that night. He needed to read more first. He spent the rest of the evening with the contracts and financial reports, moving through them with the methodical patience he brought to every diagnostic problem. Start at the beginning, follow the sequence, do not skip ahead, do not assume. The contracts were legitimate on their surface. Clean legal language, standard commercial real estate structure, all the correct signatures in the correct places. But some of them contained provisions that caught his attention precisely because they did not fit the surrounding structure. Payments directed to intermediary companies with names that sounded plausible and addresses that, when he looked them up on his phone, returned either nothing or an address associated with a registered agent service rather than an actual operating business. Disbursements broken into smaller amounts, timed in patterns that seemed calibrated to stay below certain reporting thresholds. He was not an accountant, and he was not a lawyer, but he had enough practical intelligence to recognize a pattern when it repeated across multiple documents. Money was moving, in careful increments, toward places that did not quite exist. The name at the bottom of every financial report, in the signature line marked Chief Financial Officer, was Jason Cole. Lucas did not know that name. But when he found a photograph in the manila envelope, a man in his late 40s, silver-haired in a dark navy suit, photographed in what appeared to be a corporate lobby, standing beside an award plaque, he recognized the face. He had seen that man in the elevator at Voss Capital Tower on 2 separate occasions. A man who held himself with the specific ease of someone who had never been asked to wait for anything. He set the photograph aside and went back to the email printouts, reading the fragments that had survived the marker. One line read, "Transfer before the audit window closes." On a different page, partially visible between 2 thick strokes of black ink, "Charlotte doesn't know about the secondary accounts," and at the bottom of a third page, so heavily redacted that only a single line survived. "If this surfaces, the acquisition falls apart, and we lose everything." Charlotte. Lucas did not need long to connect that name. Charlotte Voss was the CEO. The name appeared in the company letterhead across every page he had read that evening, and a quick search on his phone showed him the rest. 31 years old, had taken over the company from her father at 28 when the elder Voss's health declined. Described in business press as disciplined and formidable, photographed consistently in blazers and conference rooms with the composed expression of someone who believed they understood exactly what was happening inside their own organization. Lucas sat with the weight of what he was reading. Then his phone rang. The number was blocked. He answered the way he always answered blocked numbers. Years of on-call maintenance work had made that reflex automatic. The voice on the other end was male and unhurried in a way that only a certain kind of man can manage, completely still, completely measured, the voice of someone who had already decided the outcome of the conversation before placing the call. "Mr. Mercer," the voice said, "I think you may have purchased something that doesn't belong to you." Lucas said nothing. He counted 3 seconds. Then he ended the call and sat in the spare room with the boxes and the documents and the USB drives until the apartment went fully dark around him. Monday morning, Lucas arrived at Voss Capital Tower at 7:15, the same as always, pushed his maintenance cart through the service entrance on the south side, and went to work. Fluorescent fixtures on the 14th floor. A drain blockage in the 4th floor kitchen that took 25 minutes. An HVAC filter inspection on the 9th floor that should have been straightforward. He was halfway through the filter inspection, standing in the maintenance corridor with the access panel open, when he became aware that someone was watching him from the far end of the hall. Jason Cole stood there in his Navy suit with his hands in his pockets, not speaking, not approaching, simply standing with the patience of a man making a point that requires no words. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. Jason Cole turned and walked to the elevator. The doors closed. Lucas went back to the filter. 3 hours later, Owen Drake called him to the building management office and read him the suspension notice in a tone that suggested he was reading from a script someone else had written. Multiple staff members on the upper floors, behavioral concerns, inappropriate conduct, administrative suspension pending internal review, paid leave effective immediately. Lucas looked at the form Owen slid across the desk. No names, no dates, no specific incidents described, only a series of checked boxes under a printed heading. He had been employed at this building for 4 years and had never received a complaint of any kind. He asked Owen when the complaints had been filed. Owen's eyes moved to the wall calendar and back. He did not answer the question. Lucas picked up the form, read it fully, set it back down, and said he understood. He went back to his cart and collected his personal tools. That evening, the summons came through the building management assistant. Ms. Voss would like to speak with him at his convenience on the 22nd floor. Lucas took the elevator up, walked across a floor that smelled of carpet cleaner and expensive coffee, and sat across from Charlotte Voss in a chair that cost more than his monthly rent. She was exactly as she appeared in press photographs, composed and direct, the kind of person who listens before speaking and speaks without wasting words. She wore a white blazer, had a folder on the desk she did not open, and looked at him with the level gaze of someone who had been managing complicated people in complicated situations for long enough to read them quickly. She told him she had been informed about the auction purchase and asked him directly whether he had reviewed the materials. He told her calmly that he had been working through them. She nodded. The single, contained nod of someone whose expectation had been confirmed, and then offered him $5,000 for the return of everything. A fair exchange, she said. No suggestion of wrongdoing on his part, just a company wanting its property back. Lucas sat quietly for a moment and thought about the fragment of text he had read 2 nights before, the line that said Charlotte doesn't know about the secondary accounts, and he considered what that line meant about the woman sitting across from him, whether she was the obstacle or also, in some way, another person being kept in the dark. He told her he needed more time to consider. Her expression did not change, but something behind it settled into a different register. "I would encourage you not to take too long," she said. The termination letter arrived by courier the following morning. Violation of confidentiality protocols, access badge deactivated by noon, and that afternoon, parked in the tower's underground structure, his truck sat with a flat tire. No note, none needed. Lucas called Samuel from the parking structure while he was crouching in the cold with the lug wrench, his knuckles going white, and he told him everything. The documents, the USB drives, the phone call at night, the suspension, the $5,000 offer, the termination, the tire. Samuel listened through all of it without his usual interruptions, and when Lucas finished, Samuel said, "Adrian Welch." Adrian was 44, a former corporate auditor who had spent 8 years at a regional accounting firm before leaving to work independently, and who owed Samuel a favor of the long and complicated variety. Samuel called him while Lucas changed the tire. Adrian agreed to a meeting the following evening. They sat at Adrian's kitchen table for 2 hours while Adrian read through the financial reports and contracts in silence, occasionally pausing to make marks in a small spiral notebook. Lucas sat across from him and waited without speaking, the way he waited for diagnostic equipment to return a reading. At the end of the second hour, Adrian removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose. "If these documents are authentic," Adrian said, "what you are holding is evidence of a systematic diversion of company capital, minimum 3 years of operation. Structured specifically to avoid triggering standard audit thresholds. The shell entities here," he tapped a page with one finger, "are a classic layering structure. Conservative estimate based on what I can quantify from this sample, $8 million. The actual figure is probably considerably higher." He looked at Lucas steadily. "You need a litigation attorney. Not next week, today." That same evening, Samuel called in another favor and reached Diana Okafor, who agreed to an initial consultation the following morning. Diana Okafor was 41, with short natural hair and a desk buried under 3 parallel active case files and a framed certificate on the wall from the Colorado bar that looked like it had been placed there and then immediately forgotten about. She had spent the first decade of her career at a large civil litigation firm before leaving to practice independently, taking the cases she found worth her time, which tended to be the ones other lawyers considered too complicated or too adversarial to be manageable. She listened to Lucas for 40 minutes without writing anything down, her eyes moving occasionally to the documents he had spread on the edge of her desk. Then she opened the first box, read for 15 minutes in the same silence Adrian had maintained, and set the papers down. "Your termination letter arrived the day after you declined a settlement offer," she said. "That sequence, combined with the pretextual nature of the disciplinary complaint that preceded your suspension, a complaint with no names, no dates, and no specifics, constitutes retaliatory discharge against a potential whistleblower. That alone is actionable. What is in these boxes transforms the scope of the matter significantly." She agreed to take the case on a contingency structure and had the engagement letter ready before Lucas left her office. But before any formal process moved forward, Lucas did something he had decided on alone, without asking anyone's advice. He sat at his kitchen table that evening, the same table where he had done the napkin math about the rent shortfall, the same surface where Ella spread her sketchbook on weekend mornings. And he wrote a letter. Not to Diana, not to any regulatory body. To Charlotte Voss at the 22nd floor, Voss Capital Tower, delivered through the United States Postal Service. He wrote it by hand on plain white paper in careful block printing because he had never trusted his own handwriting for anything important and wanted every word to be perfectly legible. He did not write it as a threat. He did not write it as a demand. He described, in the precise sequence that events had occurred, what he had found in Unit 114, what he understood those materials to mean, and what had happened to him in the 7 days after he declined to hand them back. He described the pretextual suspension with no names or dates on the complaint form. He described the termination letter that arrived the morning after he refused the $5,000 offer. He described the phone call at midnight and the flat tire in the parking structure. He did not tell Charlotte what to do with any of it. He simply laid the sequence out in order, the way a technician documents a fault in a maintenance log: date, observation, consequence, so that the person reading it cannot pretend the pattern is accidental. At the end of the letter, he folded in 3 photocopied pages from the manila envelope, the pages containing the line, "Charlotte doesn't know about the secondary accounts." He sealed the envelope, addressed it, and mailed it the following morning. 4 days later, a letter arrived from a law firm he had never heard of, stating in formal language that he was in unlawful possession of stolen proprietary business materials and that legal action was being considered. He brought it to Diana that same afternoon. She read it twice, set it down, and allowed herself a brief contained expression that was not quite a smile. "Good," she said. "They're scared." The letter arrived on Charlotte Voss's desk on a Wednesday morning, sorted by her assistant, and placed at the bottom of the physical correspondence stack with the rest of that day's mail. She worked through the stack in order as she always did, beginning with legal and ending with personal correspondence, and by the time she reached the plain white envelope addressed in block print, she had already reviewed 3 acquisition proposals and signed off on a board agenda. She read the letter standing up, something she rarely did, and then read it again slowly, pausing for a long time at the 3 photocopied pages folded inside. She stood at her office window for several minutes afterward, looking at the building across the street without registering anything about it. Then she sat down, placed the letter face down on her desk, and told her assistant to clear the afternoon. She did not call Jason Cole. She considered it for perhaps 30 seconds and then decided against it, which was the first decision she had made in this sequence entirely on her own terms, without the intermediary of someone else's framing. Instead, she placed a call to an independent auditing firm, one with no prior relationship to Voss Capital Group, recommended to her years ago by her father's attorney and never used, and asked them to begin an immediate preliminary review of the company's financial records for the previous 4 fiscal years. She described it as a routine internal audit. She told them to begin with the CFO's division. She provided access credentials. She did not tell them what she was looking for. She did not need to. Jason Cole spent those 10 days moving through the company with the confidence of a man who believed the situation was fully controlled. He had the lawyers applying formal pressure on Lucas Mercer. He had the termination on record with documentation that looked procedurally sound. He had the financial structures distributed across corporate entities that had survived 2 standard audit cycles without producing a single significant finding. He was not a careless man. He had built this system over 3 years with the specific intention that it would hold up under ordinary scrutiny, and he had never had reason to believe that ordinary scrutiny was not the only kind that would ever be applied to it. He attended the same meetings, made the same decisions, reviewed the same reports, moved through the same corridors, and on the 11th day he received a calendar invite to Charlotte's office for the following morning, marked simply, Internal Matter. The lead auditor placed the preliminary findings report on Charlotte's desk that same evening. 42 pages. 7 major discrepancies. Transfer sequences directed at entities whose ownership traces led through 3 or 4 layers before arriving at nothing clean. The timeline began 37 months prior and had continued, with minor adjustments in structure through the previous quarter. The total figure that could not be reconciled against any documented business purpose was $11.2 million. Charlotte read all 42 pages before she went home. She did not sleep well. She had built 3 years of decisions on the assumption that she understood the condition of her company, and that assumption had just been shown to her, in 42 pages of numbered findings, to have been wrong in the most basic possible way. Jason Cole came to her office the following morning in his navy suit, carrying his coffee, settling into the chair across from her desk with the ease of a man who had never once felt out of place in that room. Charlotte had placed nothing on the desk except a single USB drive. One of the 2 from the black hard case that Lucas Mercer had mailed to Diana Okafor's office as part of the formal documentation handover. She let Jason Cole sit. She let him set his coffee down. She let him ask, with the friendly patience of someone accustomed to directing conversations, what was on the agenda. Then she slid the USB drive across the desk without speaking. He picked it up. He looked at it. He turned it over once and set it back down, and in that motion the ease went out of him completely, the way pressure goes out of a line when the valve is finally found and closed. He began to speak. Accounting irregularities, fiscal year reconciliation complexity, the ordinary difficulty of managing large-scale capital flows across multiple subsidiary entities. Charlotte let him speak. She watched his hands. She watched the way a man performs certainty when certainty is already gone. When he finished, she said, "You have 30 minutes before I contact the Securities and Exchange Commission. I would use that time to call your attorney." He did not use those 30 minutes wisely. 2 days later, a middleman reached out to Lucas Mercer by phone with an offer, $50,000 in a cashier's check, full and final settlement, in exchange for all original materials and a signed non-disclosure agreement. Lucas was sitting in Diana Okafor's office when the message came through. He looked at Diana across the desk. She was already handing him her phone, the recording application open and running. He called the number back. He confirmed the offer in clear, specific language, the amount, the conditions, the purpose. The voice on the other end confirmed it in return. Diana archived the recording before Lucas had finished setting the phone down. "Attempted obstruction of justice," she said. "This case is now twice as strong as it was this morning." The formal investigations that followed moved with the grinding patience of institutional process. SEC filings, FBI involvement through the White Collar Division, a parallel inquiry from the State Attorney General's office, subpoenas and document requests and depositions that stretched across weeks and then months. Jason Cole was placed on administrative leave within a week of Charlotte's confrontation, his system access revoked, his personal and business accounts flagged by court order as the scope of the investigation was established. His name appeared briefly in a Denver business publication under a headline about an internal audit at Voss Capital Group. Lucas read it at the kitchen table, set the phone face down, and went to check on Ella's homework. The criminal process was not his responsibility. His responsibility had ended when he handed the last document to Diana Okafor and answered the last question from the investigator who came to Diana's conference room with a recorder and a legal pad. Diana moved the wrongful termination suit forward in parallel with the criminal track, and it resolved considerably faster. 3 weeks after formal filing, Voss Capital's legal team contacted Diana's office to open settlement discussions. The discussions took 4 days. The outcome was $87,000 in compensation, a written formal acknowledgement that Lucas Mercer's termination had been improper and retaliatory, and a clean employment record with no adverse notation of any kind. Before the settlement papers were finalized, Charlotte Voss requested a meeting with Lucas directly. She did not send the request through her legal team. She called Diana's office herself, identified herself by name to the receptionist, and asked to speak with Lucas Mercer at his convenience. She arrived at Diana's office building in a car she drove herself, walked in without an assistant or a lawyer, and sat down across from Lucas in the small conference room with her hands folded on the table and nothing in front of her. She looked like someone who had spent several weeks doing the full accounting of what she had allowed to happen and had not yet finished arriving at a position of comfort about it. She acknowledged 3 things in sequence, without qualification or softening. First, his termination had been improper, and she had permitted a pretextual process to be used against a man who had done nothing wrong. Second, when he declined her $5,000 offer, she had interpreted his refusal as obstruction rather than as the response of someone who understood exactly what was in those boxes and why it mattered, and she had allowed his dismissal to follow rather than asking the harder question. Third, Jason Cole had used the authority she had granted him and the trust she had extended over 6 years to build a structure designed specifically to keep her from knowing the truth about her own company's finances, and by leaving that structure unexamined, by treating her CFO's word as the final answer on every financial question, she had been a passive participant in her own isolation. She said all 3 of these things with the flat, careful delivery of a person reciting facts that are expensive to say. Lucas listened to all 3. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he said, "I'm not looking for an apology. I'm looking for what comes next to be different." Charlotte held his gaze and said she understood. A silence settled into the room. Nobody rushed to fill it. After the settlement was signed and countersigned, Voss Capital's legal team formally extended an offer of re-employment, a specific position, a salary well above what Lucas had been earning, effective immediately. He read the offer letter twice and set it aside without answering. What he proposed instead, in a short document at his kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, was a maintenance services contract, not employment. An independent arrangement. His terms, his schedule, billed quarterly, his work overseen directly by the building's facilities director with no intermediary management layer between his judgment and the people responsible for the building's operation. He submitted the proposal through Diana's office. Charlotte reviewed it the same afternoon it arrived and approved it the following morning. They signed the contract in Diana's conference room. Charlotte extended her hand across the table and Lucas took it. Jason Cole entered a guilty plea 14 weeks later on 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of obstruction of justice, and was sentenced to 41 months in federal prison alongside restitution orders covering the recoverable portion of the diverted funds. The shell companies he had used were dissolved by court order. The money that could be traced was recovered in part. The rest was gone, which is the ordinary fate of money that has been moved carefully enough for long enough. Lucas did not attend any of the court proceedings. He had given his deposition, answered every question under oath, handed over every document in his possession. What happened in those rooms afterward was the system's work, not his. On a cold morning in mid-November, a few weeks after all the papers had been signed and all the phone calls had stopped, Lucas drove out to Denver Metro Storage. The lot was quiet on a weekday, 1 other car at the far end, a woman loading boxes into a sedan, otherwise empty. He parked his truck and walked down the road to Unit 114. The door was rolled all the way up. The interior was clean and empty, swept out, the concrete floor bare. The only sign that anything had ever been stored there was a faint rectangle on the floor, slightly lighter in color than the surrounding surface, where the cardboard boxes had blocked the dust and the light for whatever period of time they had sat there. He stood at the entrance for a while, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the empty space. The air smelled of concrete and cold, and the distant exhaust of the access road. He did not go inside. There was nothing in there anymore. His phone rang. Samuel's name on the screen. "There's another auction on Saturday," Samuel said. "You coming?" Lucas turned away from the open door and walked back toward his truck, his footsteps steady on the cracked asphalt. He thought about the coffee can in the kitchen cabinet, which held considerably more than $500 now. He thought about the signed contract on his desk. He thought about what Ella had asked him the night before, what exactly his job was these days, and how he had answered her, same as always. I find what's broken and I fix it. She had looked at him for a moment and then gone back to her sketchbook, which he took as a sign that she found this reasonable. Yeah, Lucas said into the phone, I'll come, but this time I'm bringing more cash. He got in the truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. Unit 114 stood open and empty in the November light behind him, its aluminum door raised like a hand, like an acknowledgement, like the last panel in a story that had begun with a $500 bet and ended somewhere neither party had quite expected. $500, a dusty storage unit, and a man that nobody had thought to look at until he turned out to be the only one who refused to look away.